All right. Take two, everybody. So, technical difficulties, they do happen, but we thought that this conversation was super important, so we're going to sojourn on. So, again, my name is Brenda Williams. I'm the founder of the Power of Girlhood. And the Power of Girlhood is an organization for girls between the ages of 8 and 18. And we focus on leadership cultivation and development, as well as entrepreneurship, emotional intelligence and learning, as well as performing arts. And so it was very important to us that, especially in the season of COVID, that our families, our community have all the resources necessary to navigate the college experience, but in particular, how relevant historically Black colleges and universities are. And yes, we've seen them in movie story lines and on TV. And yes, there are amazing halftime shows. And yes, we have the fraternities and sororities, but I also want to give credence to the intellectual prowess of the African American community, and also those who are guardians of the culture. And the HBCUs are very much that. They have been that, and they will continue to be that. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the HBCU broker herself, who is a one woman army who is doing everything that she can to make college education, and in particular, HBCU college education, accessible for all students who want to apply. So, without further ado, welcome Tiffany E. Brockington. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, we are in a very interesting time in history where we're not going back to life as normal, life as it was. And so now we're seeing in America in particular, we're having some very honest conversations about race. Um, and as it pertains to historically Black colleges and universities, several of the girls who've come through my program may have gone to, mixed high schools or had an experience where they were the minority at their high school and very much wanted and are having the um, why you're so passionate about HBCUs, and two, why HBCUs are so relevant, especially right now.
So it was the first question, why am I so passionate?
Why you're so passionate and why are HBCUs so relevant right now?
Okay. Um I don't think I separate being passionate for HBCUs. I don't think I separate that from the passion and appreciation I have for Black people, Black things. Um, so for me, there it's like if I love myself, then I gotta love HBCUs. If I do this for myself, then I
Mm.
have to do this for HBCUs. So that's how I think about it. And I think about it in terms of like the love has to be active. Like you can say you love yourself, but what do you do daily to and for
Mm.
yourself that shows that you love yourself? And so in an HBCU context, it's if you love your HBCU or if you love HBCUs in the collective sense, are you aware of everything that's going on? Are you engaging with your elected officials, whether you're in an HBCU state or not? Like, what are you doing that's an active show of love for your HBC? So that's how I think about the passion part of this. And then the second question was what was it again?
Why are HBCUs, especially right now, why are they so relevant?
So actually this question actually throws people more often than not, because the opposite of that question or the assumption could be like, do you think they're irrelevant? So like they've never they've never not been irrelevant. They're still relevant. Um Especially for people who, especially for Black people who are still first generation college going,
Okay.
still low income. um they're especially important. They create a pathway towards being college educated. Um, so that's why that's at least for me as somebody who actually is not first generation, and seeing and knowing the difference that a college education can bring, and knowing that, if you're low income first generation college going and Black, your best bet, your best option for you to get to and through is going to be an HBCU. It won't be a flagship traditionally white institution or one of the state institutions. It won't be, and that's literally because they weren't made for that. And so in my mind, it's a no-brainer. Like, why would you go someplace that barely wanted, or that only admitted you once segregation was legally outlawed? So like, why? So that's just how I think about it. I hope that answers the question sufficiently. I felt like I was rambling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so it brings in relevance is that, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that it was never irrelevant, and that even though many students now do have the option of going to predominantly white institutions, is it your feeling that though it may be legal, that doesn't necessarily the welcome wagon has been, oh, we're happy to have you
Yeah.
here, even though that legally they have to admit you, but it doesn't mean that the culture has shifted.
Yeah, it's like this whole thing of people, or I just saw a story the other day about some of the schools like Harvard and Yale and the schools in that range are suspending SAT and ACT scores. And it's like, just because they suspend those things does not mean that they're going to admit people without regard to other things that might exclude you from being admitted. It's like, it doesn't, that's not what that means, so just because you can doesn't mean that you will, or that the system has changed all that much. It's still a traditionally white system, which means that it traditionally excludes Black people and other people of color and other minorities. So like, you know
Yeah, yeah. So navigating that space, especially, so let's just use Detroit for example. When we think about a student, right? But let's think about a student who comes from a predominantly Black city, have grown up going through, and let's just use another example, DPS, where again the majority of their classmates will look like them. What do you feel that the HBCU experience will offer them with regard to not just historical context, but cultural context as well?
I can tell you that for me in particular, because I am a Detroiter, and I was only a DPS student for a year, but I went to school in Detroit all of my life except for high school, when I went to a school of choice in Ferndale. And I'm considerably well traveled. Actually, I am privileged. I should just say that flat. And so I've traveled well, I wouldn't say extensively, but I'm a little biased in that regard. I know a lot of people from a lot of different places, but I can tell you that when I got to Howard, and Howard is in this example an anomaly because there are people from all over at Howard. I did not meet Black people from Alaska until I got to Howard. I didn't know that Black people lived in Alaska. I didn't know that Black people lived in Colorado. Like, I didn't know that Black people lived in Oregon. I just did not know. And that's only because I didn't know, as somebody who is a Detroiter, whose family is not from those places, I didn't know that Black people actually got that far and settled. So for me, being a Black Detroiter, going to school all my life with Black people, I didn't know that. And that's just the continental United States, or Alaska's not. Geography. Anyway.
Alaska's up there. It's up there.
Is it connected? I don't remember if it's connected or not. But
Yeah.
and that's just me counting, the 50 states. I didn't know Black people from the islands. Like I didn't know Black people from Trinidad and Tobago. I didn't know Black people from Jamaica. Like I did not know these people like how I know you. And so that makes a difference. Actually, on my move-in day, and I'm saying it in my head, I was walking with a friend of mine who's from Flint. So we were together because that's the only person at that point that I knew at Howard very well. So I'm walking with him and we see this young man and he looks normal to us. He looks like a Black guy, like, hey. And so he had all these things with him. And we're like, where are you going? And like nobody else was with him. And so when he spoke, I'm listening. So when people talk, I'm listening, but sometimes I'm not focused on what you're saying. I'm like literally just listening to your voice. And so in my head, I hear his accent first. And I'm like, he's from somewhere else. And it turns out he was from Jamaica. He was trying to find his way to his residence hall. And we were actually on the way to his residence hall. He just got a little turned around. And that was like the first person I met from, I believe, Jamaica. And he was a Howard student. He was moving in. And so, I mean, that's one thing that you encounter if you go to an HBCU that's diverse in that regard, like Howard. I can absolutely tell you, I did not know as many New Yorkers as I know now. I can tell you that I can detect a difference in their culture by virtue of which borough they're from. Some of like it's those differences that make the difference that if you're paying attention, you'll grow from. And so, but that's just my experience. Now that I work at an HBCU in very, very, very white Kentucky, it's a little different. The people that are here are mostly from the Midwest area. There are some outlying places, like we do have a few students from New York, California, Hawaii. There are a few from, I think, Puerto Rico and some other. I can see the student's name in my head, but that does not help me help you right now. But like from places like that, I'm like, wow, you chose Kentucky? That's very interesting. Like, this is Kentucky. It's cold here. You're not used to being here. Like, so, and we have a lot of students who are transfers from and again, I see their names in my head, but I can't recall their country. But I will tell you that that there was, this actually happened a few months ago before quarantine. This young man came to my office and he told me his name. And before he told me his name, he was like, yeah, it's a little weird. And I've already, clocked the accent. So I'm like, okay, sir. Well, we'll get to that afterwards. So he tells me his name. And so I say his name because he spelled it out. He didn't say it. And so I say his name. He's like, oh, you can pronounce it. And I just looked at him like, yes. He's like, but how do you know how to pronounce it? I said, because I have friends that are from the country that you're from. So he's like, wait, you do? I'm like, yes. And so he was just like, wow, this has never happened to me before. And I was like, great. So this, what I'm about to say to you next has probably never happened to you before, right? So I was like, your mother named you what she named you for a reason. You over here prefacing it with, it's a little weird, is disrespectful to yourself and to your mother. Make these people pronounce your name, because I'm always going to pronounce your name. I'm literally always going to pronounce your name. You're here at an HBCU and you're over here prefacing who you are with, it's a little weird. I said, don't do that again. Don't do it again. Make these people say your name. That's your name. And it's like, I never thought that I would have to tell that to a student here, but in knowing now that people come here, our students come here not knowing or not being empowered to know and to be, it's work to be done even still here, So a Detroiter, that is what would encounter going to an HBCU, or even the aspect of being, I'm from the North. I am not Southern by any stretch of the imagination. I've been around Southern people, but that's not my culture. That's not my frame of reference for much of anything. Even my grandparents, half of them were from Tennessee, but I was socialized much more with the grandparents and that the side of the family that's from the Eastern Shore. So that's not necessarily down south type Southern. Yes, it's south of the Mason-Dixon line, but not by that much. So even that, there's a difference in that regard, especially if you're going to be a Detroit student or Detroiter going further down south to maybe Alabama or North Carolina or Tennessee or Georgia. Like there's that difference in that shock. Like Southern people are always saying hello and hi, how you doing? Asking like just friendly, basic questions that if you're from Detroit, you're going to be like, why are you asking me all these questions? And that's the nice way of putting it. Or you might not speak. You might think a head nod is sufficient, and that's rude. That is rude.
Mm-hmm.
Just somebody or just stare at them. So these are things that you pick up on. These are actually conversations to have, because if you've never left your zip code, you don't know that you're potentially offending people before you've even opened your mouth to speak, because they understand things differently than how you understand.
Yeah. I think that's so important that you bring up like cultural context, even within a culture, on how vast it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think in our educational system we fully talk about the diaspora and how vast it is. So, as a former educator for Black children, I would get this question: Black people don't, or the statement, Black people don't speak Spanish, and I'm like,
who don't speak Spanish?
What do you mean they don't? What do you mean? What do you? Because we don't, again, contextualize how vast the African imprint is all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, we think Cotton Kingdom, which was what you just, mentioned. We think about, what is it, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, like that. We only think about like the South,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't think about, like you said, Oregon, and how, after post-slavery, we moved to other parts of the country. We think about, finally, we're having a conversation about the Tulsa Massacre, but, other massacres throughout these settlements, these areas where Black people went and built thriving communities, only to have them, torn down again, destroyed by the very system that enslaved them. So I think that you're offering, even within the culture, another cultural lens and another education that may not happen if one decides to go to a predominantly white institution. There's another layer, it feels, that the HBCU experience offers, even from a cultural and historical standpoint, because we don't necessarily have these kinds of conversations. So right now, we're definitely in a state of flux, and admissions are interesting to navigate under normal circumstances. But right now, what are some tips and strategies that you would give to parents who are enrolling their students for this upcoming fall at an HBCU? What are some things that they maybe would want to look out for?
Today is June 23rd, and I know that some of our schools in particular, some of our states, our public HBCUs have they have deadlines that you must adhere to, especially if you are a student who is applying to a school. You are the out-of-state applicant. So in particular, North Carolina Agricultural Technical State University, A&T, their application deadline is June 30th. and if you're an out-of-state student, you need to be applying by June 30th. And for example, with Corona happening, things shutting down, being in quarantine, guidance counselors and college advisors already had a lot to deal with. This threw off a whole lot of things. And maybe you wanted to go, maybe you want to be an Aggie, and maybe you thought you had more time than you did, but you as an out-of-state applicant in particular, for any of these public institutions, but A&T especially, you need to be aware of the deadlines. It becomes, I would say, a mathematical type of equation, especially for a school like A&T. They only accept 25%. 25% of their student body is out of state, and so that's for any public institution in North Carolina. So A&T, if you want to increase your chances of getting in as an out-of-state student, you need to apply sooner rather than later. And so that's something to be aware of. And that's a way to govern yourself in applying to institutions that are selective, like A&T is selective. And that's the most important thing. I would say for other institutions, maybe like Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, those are highly selective institutions as well. But they don't have a law, and they're private. They don't necessarily have a law that says you must keep this many out of state students, because that doesn't come into play for a private institution like it does for a public institution. So knowing the type of institution that you're applying to is very important. Adhering to the deadlines is very important. We might be in the middle of a pandemic, but there has to be some order somewhere, and you want to make sure that you're on the right side of the order. You don't want to be on the wrong side. It's already hard to get into all of these institutions, in particular the ones that I just mentioned. So if that's what you want for yourself, you want to be on the right side of order.
And say more about the universal application too, since you're talking about deadlines and being really on top of things. So can you explain more about the universal application?
You mean like the Black College Common App?
Yep, the Black College Common App.
There is a way to apply to, I think at this point it's 55 HBCUs. It's called the Common Black College App. You just upload one test score and one transcript, and you can select up to 4 HBCUs as your top 4. So all of the schools get your application, but the top 4 will automatically pull your application. So it's still up to you as the applicant to contact the other schools that weren't in your top 4 to make sure that they pull your application. Now, there are 100 accreditation secure HBCUs to apply to. So I already told you all that it's 55 HBCUs on the Common Black College App. That means that there's quite a few that are not on the Black College Common App. So you will need to apply to them directly, or however they say that is best to apply to that school. I also will say that if an HBCU has a free application, you should do that application separately from the Black College Common App or any other type of way to apply, if that makes sense. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, Tiffany, I want to thank you so much for joining us in the conversation today. It was very illuminating, and I hope that even in the replay, that parents and girls think about the richness that is offered from the HBCU experience. What are some misnomers and things that you would really like to share that would maybe dispel some misconceptions about HBCUs?
Um, the first one that I encounter mostly, and this is across the board from guidance counselors, college advisors, students, parents, and that's this idea that HBCUs are expensive, and that's just untrue. And I say that because most of the time when I'm talking to these people in particular, they only know about the most expensive HBCUs that have the national brand and footprint, the household HBCU. So like, and that's my own HBCU, to be quite honest, my undergraduate alma mater. So in my head, I'm like, okay, yes, Howard is expensive. But when you compare Howard to all the other universities in DC, it's about 25 grand less than all the rest of them. And that same trend follows for all of the HBCUs that are in the state with other traditionally white institutions. They're still cheaper. So it's like HBCUs are not expensive. You only know about the most expensive HBCUs for the most part. And two, they're still cheaper than their traditionally white institution counterparts. So like it's not a thing. I mean, college is expensive, period. Like it's an investment. Like just keep that in mind.
Yeah,
It is
college
an
is
investment.
yes, it
But
is. I'm still paying on my investment.
yeah, but it's not too expensive. It's not more expensive. And I would say that what you can't see as a cost to attending a traditionally white institution, that's more dangerous than seeing a price tag on an HBCUs. Because like how do you assign a value or quantify racial trauma? Like how do you do that? Because you will experience that at a traditionally white institution. You will, even in 2020, because it's happened. So like when people say it's too expensive, I'm like, so what are you willing to pay for peace? What are you willing to pay for cultural and educational affirmation? Like, what are you willing to pay?
Yeah.
What's the cost? If you can even assign a cost, like, what is it? What is it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, to me, I think those are really great questions to ponder and for us to, really have a deeper discussion with. And like I said, I hope that parents will get in touch with you. I will leave Tiffany's information on our Facebook group because she has many a workshop that comes up. She's also available for boot camps and coaching around the HBCU experience because she is just so dedicated to this legacy that has been built from HBCUs. And again, helping to sustain the culture. And it's really important in these days and times that we do understand the intellect, because I think it's easy to see us on the field and see us on TV, and not to discredit entertainment value, but I also think that there's a certain intellectual prowess that we possess as well. And then that goes all the way back to Timbuktu and some of the other advanced civilizations from Africa, where we were mathematicians, architects, um, librarians, scientists, scholars. So this is not new, but for many of us, it is important for us to dig deeper into the truth of who we are and the contributions that we made globally and whose backs this country was built on. So I think that it's very important to honor the HBCU who was holding the mantle culturally and historically for the people. So, Tiffany, I cannot thank you enough for the work that you do in carrying this mantle and reminding us, and in some cases, informing us of how important
Yeah.
scholastic achievement is, especially the achievement through the HBCU experience. So, again, I cannot thank you enough for the work that you do and being available to our community. And so, parents and girls, please reach out to Tiffany. I'll leave her information on our Facebook page. And Tiffany, you are always welcome here. And if you are available on Saturday, we're celebrating the 9th year of the Power of Girlhood. And so we do have a panel of experts. So if you're available, we would love to have you on the panel of experts to talk about. We're talking about everything from mental health, financial literacy, college and career planning. And this is all free for the low recession sheet price of free. We just really want our girls and our families to have all of the resources necessary for a whole, complete, and healthy life. So again, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
And we'll see you all next Tuesday. We have an amazing young artist. She's a recent graduate from Cass Tech. She has her own business called Her Hands Are Crafty. And Deshaya Ventura is out here with art and creativity. She makes purses out of duct tape. She made a dress. She was recently, yes, entered into a competition for her prom dress that she made. I know that. I think it is so dope. She's also part of the Mint Artist Guild. So not only is she's an artist, but she is a compensated artist. So love that. And she'll be sharing her story on how you too can use your creativity to monetize yourself, support yourself, and also to heal yourself, because art is very cathartic and it's very healing. So we're going to hear from her, a recent high school graduate. Yeah, COVID high school graduate. So bless her heart. Out here doing amazing things in the community as a practicing artist. So super excited about that conversation. And Tiffany, thank you again. And I'll see you all next week.